The sound of crystal glasses clinking together always reminded me of tiny bells at a funeral. Delicate, haunting, a sound that should be beautiful, but somehow isn't. Tonight, those chimes echoed through my mother-in-law Eleanor's dining room as she held court at yet another of her impromptu dinner parties. I'm Camille, and until tonight, I thought I had mastered the art of surviving in the Thompson family. Ryan, darling, Samantha was just telling me about her father's new development project. Eleanor's voice carried that particular lilt she reserved for her carefully orchestrated moments. Perhaps you two should discuss it over coffee sometime? My husband shifted in his chair beside me, his fork scraping against bone china. Sure, Mother, that could be interesting. I stabbed my roasted duck breast, watching the pink juice pool around the perfectly arranged vegetables. Eleanor had outdone herself tonight. 12 guests, all strategically placed around her mahogany table like pieces on a chessboard. And there, 3 seats down, sat Samantha, all pearls and precision-curled blonde hair, laughing at something my father-in-law Henry had mumbled. The timing couldn't be better, really, Eleanor continued, dabbing her lips with a monogrammed napkin, especially with Ryan entering this new chapter of his life. The duck turned to ash in my mouth. New chapter? Well, yes. Eleanor's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Changes are inevitable, aren't they? Nothing stays the same forever. Ryan's hand found my knee under the table, but it felt less like comfort and more like restraint. I watched him take a long sip of wine, avoiding my gaze. Speaking of changes, Samantha chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. My father's always looking for talented architects for his projects. The right connections can make such a difference in one's career. The conversation flowed around me like poison honey, thick with implications. I caught Jessica Adams watching me from across the table, her eyes filled with that particular mix of pity and curiosity that made my skin crawl. Excuse me, I said, pushing back my chair. I need some air. The terrace offered temporary refuge. Behind me, laughter and conversation spilled through the French doors like smoke. I gripped the stone balustrade, counting breaths until I heard familiar footsteps. Cam, you're overreacting. Ryan's voice carried that placating tone I'd grown to hate. Mother's just being mother. I turned to face him. Is she? Because it sounded an awful lot like she was shopping for your next wife. Don't be ridiculous. He ran a hand through his hair. A tell I'd learned meant he was lying. You're reading too much into things. Am I? Then why haven't you looked me in the eye since she mentioned your new chapter? The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Inside, Eleanor's laugh rang out, sharp and triumphant. We should get back, Ryan said finally. They'll wonder where we've gone. As he turned away, I caught my reflection in the window, composed, polished, the perfect corporate wife in my carefully chosen dress. But something had shifted tonight, like a fault line opening beneath my feet. Ryan, my voice stopped him at the door. When did you stop fighting for us? He paused, hand on the doorknob. There's nothing to fight about, Cam. Everything's fine. But as I watched him rejoin the party, sliding easily back into his seat beside Samantha, I knew nothing would ever be fine again. Eleanor had finally played her hand, and my husband, my Ryan, had already folded. I straightened my spine and walked back inside, the crystal glasses singing their funeral song. Eleanor wanted a war? Fine, but she'd soon learn that some daughters-in-law don't go quietly into that good night. They get even. 3 days after Eleanor's dinner party, I booked a weekend getaway at the coastal resort where Ryan and I had our honeymoon. The confirmation email sat in my inbox like a challenge, daring me to believe things could be fixed with ocean views and room service. You're going where? Ryan's voice crackled through my office phone. Cam, I have that project deadline. The tide mark. I kept my voice steady, watching my computer screen blur. Remember, where you promised we'd go back every year? The silence on his end stretched until I could almost hear him calculating the cost of disappointing his mother versus disappointing me. Again. Let me check my schedule, he said finally. I'll call you back. He didn't, but Eleanor did. Darling, she cooed when I answered. Ryan mentioned your little trip idea. How wonderful. Henry and I were just saying we needed a break, and Samantha's father has that lovely beach house nearby. We could make it a proper family weekend. My fingers tightened around the phone. Actually, Eleanor, I was hoping. I've already made reservations for dinner Friday night. The chef there is simply magnificent, though not as magnificent as your cooking, of course. Her laugh tinkled like those damn crystal glasses. Ryan's so lucky to have a wife who understands the importance of family time. The trap snapped shut before I could dodge it. Say no, and I'm the selfish wife keeping Ryan from his family. Say yes, and watch my romantic getaway turn into another Eleanor production. That evening, I found Ryan in his home office, blueprints spread across his desk like battle plans. Your mother called me today. He didn't look up. She mentioned that. Did she mention she invited herself along on our weekend? Cam, don't start. His pencil moved in precise lines across the paper. You know how she gets about family activities. This wasn't supposed to be a family activity. I moved closer, placing my hand over his drawing. This was supposed to be about us. He finally met my eyes, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the man who once drove 8 hours just to bring me soup when I was sick at a conference. Then his phone buzzed, Eleanor's special ringtone, and the moment shattered. I need to take this, he said, reaching for the phone. Of course you do. I turned away, but not before catching the name on his blueprint. Adams Development Project, lead architect, Ryan Thompson. Jessica Adams' father's company. The same company Samantha had mentioned at dinner. The pieces clicked together with nauseating clarity. That weekend, I watched Eleanor orchestrate every moment like a symphony of subtle humiliation. She'd booked adjoining rooms, ensuring no private conversations. She'd arranged group activities that highlighted Samantha's youth and connections. Even the seating at dinner served her purpose. Ryan between her and Samantha, me relegated to the far end with Henry, who seemed more interested in his scotch than conversation. Your mother's quite the strategist, I said to Ryan as we prepared for bed. He paused in loosening his tie. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, just admiring how thoroughly she's planned everything, right down to making sure the Adams project landed on your desk. That was my work, not her. Was it? I met his eyes in the mirror. Like this weekend was my idea? He turned, anger finally cracking his careful facade. You're the one who wanted to come here. I wanted to come here with my husband. Instead, I got a front row seat to watching him slip away. The words hung between us like smoke. Outside, waves crashed against the shore, the same waves that had witnessed our honeymoon promises. Now they seemed to be counting down the moments until those promises broke completely. I'm going for a walk, Ryan said, grabbing his jacket. I watched from our balcony as he headed toward the beach. A slim figure detached itself from the shadows of the hotel entrance, falling into step beside him. Samantha's laugh drifted up on the night air, and something inside me hardened into diamond. Enough playing defense. Time to change the game. The cafe where Eleanor held her weekly charity committee meetings looked like it had been decorated by someone who thought quaint meant suffocating. I sat at a corner table, hidden behind an oversized fern, watching my mother-in-law's performance through leaves that needed dusting. Ladies, the hospital fundraiser simply must outshine last year's gala, Eleanor announced to her devoted audience. We can't have people saying we've lost our touch. I wasn't supposed to be here, But neither was Samantha, who sat at Eleanor's right hand like a princess in waiting, occasionally touching Eleanor's arm when making a point. The gesture was practiced, perfect, just like the strand of pearls around her neck that matched Eleanor's exactly. My coffee had gone cold when I saw it. The small envelope Eleanor slipped to Samantha beneath a discussion of table arrangements. Samantha tucked it into her designer handbag without missing a beat in her suggestion about wine selections. The meeting dispersed with air kisses and promises of email updates. I waited until Eleanor left before following Samantha, who headed not toward her car, but down the block to the local bank. Inside, I kept my distance, pretending to fill out a deposit slip while watching her approach the safe deposit boxes. The bank employee's voice carried across the quiet space. Of course, Miss Crawford, box 247, just like always. Just like always. I left before she emerged, my mind racing. That night, I waited until Ryan was asleep before sliding his keys from his jacket pocket. His key ring included one I'd never seen him use. Small, brass, with numbers that matched a certain safe deposit box. The next morning, I called in sick to work and waited outside the bank. At precisely 10:15, Eleanor arrived for her own weekly visit. I counted to 100 before entering, Ryan's key burning in my pocket. The same employee who had helped Samantha greeted me with professional courtesy. Mrs. Thompson, how lovely to see you. Your husband already accessed the box earlier this week, but you're certainly authorized. My smile felt stretched across my face. Yes, Ryan mentioned I should check some documents. The box contained exactly what I expected: property deeds, investment papers, marriage certificates, and divorce papers, already drawn up, already bearing Ryan's signature in fresh ink. But there was something else: letters, dozens of them, spanning months, correspondence between Eleanor and Samantha's father, methodically planning their children's future. The Adams Development Project was just the beginning. They had mapped out Ryan's entire career, contingent on his marriage to Samantha. My hands shook as I took photos with my phone. Behind me, the bank's door chimed. Camille! I turned to find Samantha standing there, her perfect smile faltering. For a moment, we stared at each other like actors who had wandered into the wrong scene. I suppose Eleanor sent you to check on me? Her voice dripped fake concern. She mentioned you weren't feeling well today. No, she didn't. I closed the box with a decisive click. But I'm feeling much better now. Amazing what the truth can do for one's health. Her smile tightened. I don't know what you think you found, but save it. I moved past her, then paused. Nice pearls, by the way. Eleanor has excellent taste in accessories and replacements. That evening, I sat at our dining room table, documents spread before me like tarot cards telling my future. The front door opened and closed. Ryan's footsteps paused in the doorway. You're home early, he said. Funny how finding divorce papers with your signature tends to clear one's schedule. The silence that followed told me everything his words couldn't. Cam, I can explain. Can you explain the letters too? The deals with Samantha's father? Or should I ask your mother about those? He stepped forward, reaching for me, but I held up my hand. Just don't. It's complicated, he whispered. Actually, it's very simple. I stood, gathering the documents. You chose your mother's vision of your future over our present. I just chose to stop pretending I didn't know. As I walked past him, he grabbed my arm. Where are you going? I looked at his hand, then into his eyes. To make some choices of my own. Linda's kitchen had always been my sanctuary, but tonight it felt like a confessional. The evidence I'd gathered from the safe deposit box lay scattered across her marble countertop while she poured us both generous glasses of wine. That manipulative witch, Linda muttered, examining the divorce papers. And Ryan actually signed these? I traced the rim of my glass. 2 days ago, according to the date. What are you going to do? The question hung between us like smoke. Through Linda's window, I could see Eleanor's annual charity gala in full swing at the country club across the street. Crystal chandeliers sparkled through floor-to-ceiling windows, while valets parked luxury cars in neat rows. I should be there tonight, I said. Eleanor made such a point of reminding me about my duties as a Thompson wife. Linda's eyes narrowed. You're plotting something. Maybe. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the photos I'd taken. Did you know Eleanor's been embezzling from her own charity? The letters weren't just about Ryan and Samantha. They detailed how Eleanor's been funneling donations through shell companies owned by Samantha's father. Linda nearly choked on her wine. Jesus, Cam, that's criminal? I smiled, but it felt more like baring teeth. Yes, it is. My phone buzzed. Ryan's fourth call tonight. I declined it, just as I had the others. Eleanor's not the only one with powerful friends, I continued. Remember Jessica Adams? Turns out she's been dying to step into Eleanor's role in the charity circuit. All she needs is the right opportunity. Cam. Linda's voice carried a warning. Be careful. Eleanor's dangerous when cornered. So am I. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a text from Jessica. You were right. Eleanor just announced Samantha as next year's charity chair. The board members are livid. I stood, smoothing my dress. I should make an appearance after all. Would hate to miss the fireworks. What fireworks? The ones that start when the board receives anonymous evidence of Eleanor's financial misconduct. Right about, I checked my watch. Now. Linda grabbed my arm. You'll burn every bridge. They're already burning. I'm just controlling the flames. The country club's entrance was chaos when I arrived. Board members huddled in angry clusters while Eleanor stood at the center, her perfect composure finally cracking. Samantha hovered nearby, her face pale beneath her makeup. Camille. Eleanor's voice cut through the murmurs when she spotted me. How dare you show your face here? I'm still a Thompson wife, I said sweetly. For now. Recognition flickered in her eyes. She knew I knew. Whatever you think you're doing, she hissed, you're only hurting yourself. No, Eleanor, I'm just following your example, protecting my interests. I turned to the gathering crowd. Though I suspect the charity board might have different interests to protect tonight. Ryan appeared suddenly, his face tight with anger and something else. Fear? Cam, we need to talk. Now. Like we talked about the divorce papers you signed? Or the deal you made with Samantha's father? The crowd fell silent. Eleanor's perfectly manicured nails dug into her clutch. You don't understand, Ryan started. I understand perfectly. I met Eleanor's gaze. I understand that power only works if people fear losing it. Isn't that right, Eleanor? She stepped forward, but Henry, quiet, passive Henry, suddenly appeared between us. Enough, Eleanor, he said softly. It's over. The police arrived 10 minutes later. I watched from Linda's kitchen window as they escorted Eleanor to a patrol car, her silk gown catching on the door as she ducked inside. Feel better? Linda asked, joining me at the window. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to earn Eleanor's approval, about Ryan's betrayal, about all the quiet humiliations I'd endured. No, I answered honestly, but I feel stronger. My phone buzzed again. Ryan. This time, I answered. We need to talk, he said. Yes, I agreed, watching the police car drive away. We do. The lease agreement for the old Italian restaurant sat unsigned on my desk, while Henry Thompson stood in my office doorway, looking more alive than I'd seen him in years. Eleanor doesn't know I'm here, he said, stepping inside and closing the door. But that building? It belonged to my grandmother. Eleanor's been trying to sell it for years. I studied the property photos spread across my desk. Prime location. historic charm, everything I needed for the restaurant I'd dreamed about since culinary school. Why are you showing me this? Because, Henry's voice strengthened, the property trust requires family ownership. Eleanor can't sell it without my signature, and you're still family. The implications hung heavy in the air. Before I could respond, my office door burst open. Ryan stood there, tie askew, eyes wild. You can't do this, he said. Mother's been arrested. The charity board is pressing charges. Isn't that enough? I met his gaze steadily. Your mother's legal troubles are her own doing. This is business. Business? He laughed harshly. You're trying to take everything from us. Us? The word tasted bitter. There hasn't been an us since you signed those divorce papers. Henry cleared his throat. Ryan, your mother's actions. Don't. Ryan's face flushed. You've never stood up to her before. Why start now? Because someone should have years ago. Henry placed a set of keys on my desk. The property is yours if you want it, Camille. Eleanor kept your grandmother's recipes locked away in the old kitchen safe. Seemed ashamed to let them stay buried. Ryan stepped forward. Dad, the Adams development is dead. Henry's voice carried a finality I'd never heard before. Samantha's father pulled out this morning. Seems he's worried about guilt by association. The news hit Ryan like a physical blow. Everything Eleanor had orchestrated, his career, his future, his arranged marriage, crumbling like ancient mortar. I'll need time to review the lease, I said, watching Ryan's face, and I'll want my lawyer to look it over. Of course, Henry nodded. Take all the time you need. After they left, I sat in my quiet office, running my fingers over the old keys. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Eleanor's replacement charity board meeting tomorrow. Thought you might want to attend. I smiled, remembering Eleanor's face as she was led away from the country club, but the victory felt hollow somehow, like winning a game I never wanted to play. That evening, I drove to the old restaurant. The kitchen's industrial equipment stood silent under dust covers, but the bones were good. I found the safe behind a false panel, just where Henry said it would be. Inside, wrapped in yellowed parchment, lay my grandmother's handwritten recipes, the same ones Eleanor had declared too common for Thompson family gatherings. I thought I'd find you here. I turned to find Linda in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Henry called, she explained, handing me a cup. Said you might need a friend tonight. I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore, I admitted. This started as revenge, but now it's about choosing who you want to be. Linda surveyed the kitchen. Someone who destroys, like Eleanor, or someone who creates? The recipe pages crinkled in my hands. Family history Eleanor had tried to erase, just like she'd tried to erase me. I'm keeping the restaurant, I decided, but not to spite Eleanor, because my grandmother believed food brings people together, even when they're falling apart. Linda smiled. That's the Camille I know. My phone buzzed again, Ryan calling. But this time, instead of ignoring it or answering with anger, I felt something different. Pity, maybe. Or freedom. I let it ring as I walked the empty dining room, imagining tables filled with laughter, families making memories, life moving forward instead of staying trapped in Eleanor's perfectly controlled past. Tomorrow, I'd call my lawyer. Tonight, I had recipes to read and a future to plan, one that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with reclaiming what was mine all along. The restaurant's opening night should have been my triumph. Instead, I stood in my grandmother's kitchen watching everything fall apart. 3 servers had called in sick. Eleanor's doing, no doubt. The wine delivery was mysteriously delayed. And now this. What do you mean the health inspector is here? I hissed at Linda, who'd volunteered to help manage the front of house. We passed inspection last week. Anonymous complaint, she said. They're required to investigate. Through the kitchen window, I could see the dining room filling up. Jessica had brought half the charity board. Food critics from two major papers sat at corner tables. Even Henry was there, sitting alone with an untouched glass of wine. Chef wants to know about the modified menu, my sous chef called out. With the missing deliveries. The kitchen door swung open. Ryan stood there, looking uncomfortable in his suit. Cam, we need to talk. Now. I'm a little busy. I turned back to the stove, checking the sauce that had taken 3 hours to perfect. My grandmother's recipe. Mother's being released tomorrow. The wooden spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the tile. What? The charges were reduced. She made a deal. He stepped closer. She wants the restaurant, Cam. Says she'll drop the wrongful accusation lawsuit if you sell. Wrongful accusation? The sauce began to bubble, ignored. She embezzled that money. We have proof. We had proof. The documents disappeared from the police evidence room this morning. Of course they had. Eleanor's influence reached everywhere, like poison in water. The health inspector appeared in the doorway, clipboard ready. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of Samantha speaking urgently to the food critics, her perfect smile promising secrets about the kitchen they'd want to hear. Chef! My sous chef's voice carried panic. The seafood delivery. Something's wrong. It's all spoiled. The room spun. Every carefully laid plan, every moment of preparation, crumbling like overcooked pastry. I gripped the counter, feeling the smooth surface my grandmother had once used to roll out pasta dough. You should have known better than to challenge her, Ryan said softly. Mother always wins. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the scared little boy who'd never learned to stand up to his mother, who'd signed divorce papers rather than fight, who'd rather destroy than disappoint. Get out of my kitchen. Cam, get out. The health inspector cleared his throat. Mrs. Thompson, I'll need to see your refrigeration logs. Through the window, I watched the dining room grow restless. Water glasses remained unfilled. Empty bread baskets sat like accusations on white tablecloths. Linda appeared at my side. Tell me what you need. I closed my eyes, remembering my grandmother's voice. A kitchen is a battlefield, Piccola, but we fight with love, not fear. Get me Jessica, I said, opening my eyes, and call that seafood supplier in the next town, the one Eleanor doesn't own. Already did. They're 30 minutes out. I turned to my staff. Modified menu. We're going rustic. My grandmother's emergency recipes, the ones that fed an entire village during wartime. The health inspector raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Thompson, about those logs. Check everything, I said, rolling up my sleeves, because when you're done, I want it on record that we passed, again. He blinked, surprised by my certainty. The next hours blurred into a symphony of chaos. We transformed the menu into something simpler, deeper. Every dish carried a story, not of revenge, but of survival, of making beauty from whatever remained. Near midnight, as the last critics left looking surprisingly satisfied, I found Henry still at his table. Eleanor called, he said. Wanted to know if her plan worked. Did it? He smiled, pushing a folder across the table. I had copies made of everything. The real ones never reached the evidence room. My hands shook as I touched the folder. Why? Because Eleanor didn't just try to destroy you. She destroyed every woman who ever threatened her control, including my mother. He stood. This restaurant was her prison. Now it's your fortress. I watched him leave, the folder heavy in my hands. Tomorrow, Eleanor would come home, expecting to find ruins. Instead, she'd find me, standing in my grandmother's kitchen, ready for war. Eleanor swept into my restaurant like she owned it, wearing prison like it was merely an inconvenient vacation. The lunch crowd fell silent as she made her way to my grandmother's old table, her calculated entrance perfectly timed for maximum impact. I kept cooking. Through the kitchen window, I watched Samantha slip in behind her, less confident now that her perfectly planned future had crumbled. The Adams development was dead, taking her father's reputation with it. Amazing what a few anonymous tips to the SEC could accomplish. Mrs. Thompson requests your presence, one of my servers announced. Does she? I plated the osso buco, my grandmother's recipe. Tell her she's welcome to order from the menu like everyone else. Minutes ticked by. Eleanor sat, untouched water glass collecting condensation. The dining room hummed with whispers. The fallen queen's return making for delicious gossip. The kitchen door swung open. Ryan. Mother's trying to save face, he said. Just hear her out. Like you heard me out before signing those divorce papers? He flinched. I have the original documents, the ones that prove everything, the embezzlement, the blackmail, all of it. I'm ready to testify. I set down my knife. Why now? Because I'm tired of being afraid. Through the window, I saw Henry enter, taking his usual corner table. Jessica and half the charity board occupied the center tables, vultures circling wounded prey. I wiped my hands and stepped into the dining room. Eleanor's smile remained perfect, practiced. Darling, she said, we should discuss terms. Terms? I sat across from her. For what? Don't be coy. You've made your point. Now it's time to be reasonable. Reasonable. I tasted the word. Like when you tried to replace me, or when you sabotaged my opening night. I protected this family's interests. Her voice hardened. Everything I did was for Ryan's future. No. Ryan's voice carried across the room as he approached our table. Everything you did was for control. Eleanor's smile faltered. Darling, you don't understand? I understand perfectly. He placed a folder on the table. So does the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The color drained from Eleanor's face. Samantha stood abruptly, her chair scraping against hardwood. You wouldn't? Eleanor whispered. I'm your mother. Yes, Ryan said, and that's why I waited so long to do this. I watched Eleanor's carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Her eyes darted around the room, seeking allies, finding none. Even Henry stayed seated, sipping his wine. I can still fix this, she said, reaching for her phone. I have connections. Not anymore. Jessica approached, steel beneath her smile. The charity board voted this morning. Unanimous decision. Eleanor's hand trembled. After everything I've built, you built nothing, I interrupted. You took, from the charity, from your family, from everyone who threatened your control, including Ryan's grandmother. What? Ryan turned to Henry, who finally stood. Why do you think this restaurant was empty so long? Henry's quiet voice carried. Your grandmother's success threatened your mother's position in society, so Eleanor drove her out, just like she tried to do to Camille. The truth hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. Eleanor's perfect mask cracked, revealing something almost human underneath. I did it for us, she whispered. Everything was for us. No, Mother. Ryan's voice gentled. Everything was for you. Two men in suits appeared at the entrance. FBI, right on schedule. Eleanor saw them and something in her broke. You'll fail without me, she said, but her voice wavered. You all need me. I stood, straightening my chef's coat. Actually, Eleanor, we don't. But you're welcome to order takeout when they allow outside food in federal prison. As they led her away, I caught a glimpse of real fear in her eyes. Not of prison, but of irrelevance, of losing the power she'd spent a lifetime building. Ryan stayed behind as Samantha fled, and the crowd dispersed. He stared at the empty chair where his mother had sat. I don't know who I am without her influence, he admitted. I touched his shoulder briefly. That's the point. Now you get to find out. Through the window, the afternoon sun painted shadows across my grandmother's old kitchen. Her recipes had survived, her legacy restored. Some victories, I realized, taste better than revenge. The letter from Eleanor arrived on a busy Thursday, carried in with the morning's produce delivery. I recognized her precise handwriting, unchanged by 6 months in federal prison. The envelope sat unopened beside the prep station while I worked, its presence heavy as a cast iron pan. Linda found me on the roof garden at sunset, tending to the herbs my grandmother had once grown here. The unopened letter rested between us like a landmine. The review's out, she said, sliding her tablet across the table. 5 stars. They called it a triumph of tradition and innovation. I brushed soil from my hands. Eleanor would hate that description. Good thing it's not her restaurant. The city stretched before us, lights flickering on one by one. Somewhere out there, Ryan was building his first independent project. Affordable housing of all things. Henry had finally sold their mansion, downsizing to a cottage near the beach. Life moved forward with or without Eleanor's permission. You should read it, Linda said, nodding at the letter. I know. The dinner rush came and went. I cooked, tasted, adjusted. Each dish carried a story. My grandmother's resilience, my own transformation, the complex recipe of justice and mercy that had brought me here. Near closing, Henry appeared at the kitchen door. She's being transferred next week, minimum security. I nodded, piping rosettes onto a row of desserts. I heard. She asked about the restaurant. My hand stayed steady. Did she? Said she finally understood why your grandmother fought so hard to keep it. He paused. She's different now, smaller. The letter sat in my pocket, growing heavier by the hour. After Henry left, I climbed back to the roof garden. The herbs released their scent in the night air. Rosemary, thyme, basil. My grandmother's legacy flourishing again. Finally, I opened the letter. Eleanor's words were different from her usual carefully crafted manipulations. She wrote about regret, about fear, about the suffocating weight of maintaining perfect control, about watching her son become himself without her influence, about understanding, too late, the difference between power and strength. The last line caught in my throat. You won by letting go of revenge. I lost by holding on too tight. My phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. Mom's letter? Just read it, I replied. Me too. Dinner tomorrow? I stared at his message. We'd been careful these past months, rebuilding something new from the ashes of our marriage. Not romance, but understanding, maybe even friendship. Your grandmother's carbonara, I texted back, but you're doing the dishes. His response came quickly. Deal. Below, the kitchen staff was cleaning up, their laughter drifting upward. Jessica and Linda's voices carried from the bar, discussing next month's charity event. The restaurant hummed with life, with possibility. I pulled out my grandmother's old recipe book, its pages soft with use. A photograph slipped out, Eleanor and Henry's wedding day. They looked young, unguarded. On the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, love without control, power without fear. Standing at the roof's edge, I tore Eleanor's letter into tiny pieces. The wind caught them, carrying away her confessions, her regrets, her surrender. But I kept the photograph, tucking it back into the recipe book. Some might call it weakness, keeping this small piece of the past. But I'd learned that true strength isn't in destroying every trace of what hurt you. It's in choosing what to preserve, what to transform, what to release. The kitchen below needed my attention. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new recipes, new chances to choose between control and freedom. But tonight, in my grandmother's garden, under stars that had witnessed both triumph and defeat, I finally understood. The best revenge isn't in making others small. It's in growing so large that their shadows can no longer reach you. I closed the recipe book and headed downstairs. There was work to do, stories to cook, life to savor. And somewhere in a minimum security prison, Eleanor Thompson was learning what I discovered in this very kitchen. Some ingredients can't be controlled. They can only be transformed.